one of my favorite subjects, and it kind of goes back to when I was in grad school in the 90s, a few years ago. One of the things that we saw in this one big study, we had noticed how these horses in race training had a decrease in the amount of mineral in their third metacarpal, their cannon bone. And originally we thought it was probably due to the remodeling process and factors associated with that. Zooming ahead and through a number of other studies, what we realized is this decrease in the bone mineral content of the cannon bone was because we took those horses out of a pasture setting, put them in a stall, and they had no speed work. And so that's what we typically see during the early stages of like sale prepping horses and the early stages of training. You know, as an exercise rider for many years, you know, you get these horses out of a sale and you start to break them. And your first couple, 2-3 months is all slow work. And the horse lives in a stall. That whole time, that bone mass, the amount of mineral in that cannon bone is dropping. And so oftentimes, that horse had stronger bone 5 or 6 months earlier, like when we hadn't done anything with it, than compared to after we've been handling it and handling it wrong for many months. And probably the most expensive horses out there are probably the ones at greatest risk because they're so valuable that nobody wants to see them injured. And so you do everything very carefully. You're sale prepping them with kid gloves so they look beautiful in the sale. Those horses that are homebreds and somebody plans to race them themselves and they're allowed to just be a horse living out on pasture, they're fine. They don't have the problems, not nearly to the same extent. Of course, they can still have some lameness injuries, but they're in a much better situation to start training. But even those horses, if we then go ahead and bring them into stalls, have allow them no access to high-speed exercise, you're going to lose bone mass, and that bone's going to become weaker. Long distance doesn't do anything. It's all about speed and how fast they go. And we want them to go fast, but you also don't need very much speed at all in terms of distance. So we've done a number of studies, and we've used calves as a model for horses because we can go ahead and we can harvest bones from the calves. We don't want to do that with horses, and these would be calves that would be destined for that anyway. And we've been able to show that one of the first studies we did about 16 years ago now showed that calves that were sprinted once per day, 5 days per week for about 50 meters, and this is for a 6-week period, had much stronger bone breaking force than did ones that were receiving no exercise. Just last year, we refined that, and we had this paper published in the Journal of Animal Science last year, and the Pollock Report, one of the racing online magazines, even did an article about it. We were able to show that even just one sprint per week for 6 weeks, and this sprint was 71 meters, produced over a 20% greater increase in bone breaking strength than the calves that received no sprints. And you think about that, over 20% increase in bone strength by one little sprint once per week for 6 weeks. And to put it in perspective, that total distance sprinted over 6 weeks worked out to about just a little over a quarter of a mile. And that's hardly anything. But if you look at a lot of the horses in race training in those first couple months, it's all walking, trotting, some slow loping, slow galloping. There is no speed work. And that's going to allow that bone to get weak. And so whether it's by turnout, letting a horse reside on pasture, or some very controlled sprints, very short ones, as soon as you get a handle on that horse, and what I do with my own horses, you know, when you have enough control over them and they're guiding good, let them just step it out a little bit, and you can actually bring them back real quickly. You don't produce some speed crazy horses or anything because you don't ask them to run that far, you know, maybe 50 yards, 50 meters, and it can make a huge difference in bone strength. I've actually had to search out pictures of buck shins for presentation because I've not had a horse buck shins in years and years and years. Part of the reason for also my horses live on pasture, I know that is not something everybody can do, but even without me putting sprinting speed on them, they are out there sprinting, playing all by themselves. And in fact, I often have thought, watching my own horses come running up when I call them because they think I'm going to feed them, the amount of speed work they do every day, multiple times per day, is way more than I would have ever done as an exercise rider. Oftentimes you work a horse on the track, you come back the next day, you ask the trainer, well, how'd they pull up? And you were concerned about it. Shoot, my horses are doing that all the time, and I never worry about them becoming lame. But the bone is strong because it's never had that opportunity to get weak. So it is amazing how much speed you need. You don't need much, but you need some. Now I'm going to give you the opposite extreme. We did a study with endurance horses a number of years ago, and we had a group of 2-year-old Arabians that we put into endurance training, and they were in pretty intense training regarding distance. And I'm trying to recall exactly how far they were in training for, but I think they were scheduled to do either a 50 or 60 kilometer, I think it was 60 kilometer exercise bout every 3 weeks. So you think about how many miles they have done where they can go out on a single day on a treadmill, do 60 kilometers. I think that was the distance. And we had done our radiographic measures of bone mineral content both at the start of this project and at the end of this project. And you would think after logging hundreds and hundreds of miles, they would have had increased bone strength. But we also did their pasture meets, the horses that were not in training. And there was absolutely no difference between treatments. So the horses on pasture not in training were not any less than the horses that were in training. And in fact, even though there was no statistical difference, and I'm a scientist that believes by if it's not different, it's not difference, but it looked like, and again, there was no differences. I'm not trying to claim something, but it looked like the ones that were in training maybe were decreasing bone mineral content a little bit, where the ones not in training were going up. And there's some logic behind that. The horses that we had in that endurance training, I mean, these horses they were putting in long hours in training. And when we turned them out on pasture in the evening, they were going ahead and they're drinking and they're eating and they're sleeping because they're tired. The pasture mates who were not in training, they were typical 2-year-olds. They're out there playing around. They are doing the speed work that is required. So anybody who thinks lots of miles of slow work makes stronger bone, I'm here to tell you it doesn't. A little 50-meter sprint or 50-yard sprint, even once or twice a week, does much more for bone quality than does miles and miles of training. Now, I'm not knocking that slow stuff. It's great for the mind. You can get so many benefits from that, but you need to have speed in order for bone to become strong.